Hunting or Bust, the Journey Onward by Master Atlan, Chapter 33. And take a look in the book. Show us. I really don't. Show us. Come on, guys. Give me, don't be a wimp and let us see it. Everyone, please, don't push Jaws. No, people, we must see. We've been waiting for days now. Show us, Vine Boy. Okay. John stopped and groaned. Just back off. They all sat back in their seats before the blonde boy sighed and reached up, the others leaning forward in their seats with anticipation. John parted his bangs to reveal the noticeable scar that now ran along his forehead. With the help of his aura reserves, the injury healed in just a few days, but the wound and the fix it had left a mark. Now John would always have a reminder of his fight and triumph over the Ursa Major. Ooh, Yang hummed and nodded. It actually looks pretty good. It does, he asked with uncertainty while letting his bangs fall back into place. Yeah, Yang said lamely. I mean, it'd probably look better if you had a better jawline and less goofy hair, and she gestured to most of him. You know, but it's still pretty cool. Oh, thanks. John responded in a still tone. Yang laughed. Oh, come on, you know I'm kidding, but hey, this is a good thing. Now that you got that bad boy, you know who you can totally talk because you share the same facial features. Why, thwack! Yang doubled over from the swift punch under her ribs as Weiss remained composed beside her. The Harris feigned surprise. Oh no, Yang has hurt herself somehow. Let me check on her. She bent over to Yang's ears and whispered, "Don't go giving that Moran any more reason for him to shamefully flirt and romance me. It happens enough as it is. I don't need you adding dust to the fire." "But it's what I do best." Yang wheezed out to her teammate before coughing. "Okay, as long as you don't punch my lung again, I'll shut up. Agreed?" "Agreed. She's fine," Weiss announced, still while sitting up and sipping on her coffee again. Yang pulled herself up and rubbed her side before glaring at her partner beside her. "You did nothing." Blake focused on the pages of her book and only took a break to sip some tea before resuming with her read. The well-being of her partner and the threats of the hair is a distant concern to her. She didn't even care that Yang was glaring at her right now. She was off in reading land where silence was appreciated, but ignoring the ridiculousness around you worked just as well. Nora sat up in her seat and looked over at her leader with a big smile. "Well, I think you look awesome now, John. Like one of those scarred heroes from the comics that can just look at the enemy and go, wah, and freeze them in fear, and you look like you could totally take on an army of Grimm by yourself, which is super impressive because you nearly got mauled to death just fighting one." Somehow her compliment to John had also carried an innocent jab at the expense of her leader. "Plus, you know what they say about how much the ladies love guys with scars?" "They do." John had heard his dad say something like that before, but he wasn't quite sure how well his father's advice worked in practice considering the track record. Nora tilted her head. "I think so. I'm not totally sure. I never really thought about it." "Is that true?" Kiba queried with his curiosity piqued at the topic. "Do people find scars attractive? I always thought that was just a joke." "Maybe," Yang gave a small shrug, "but it probably helps if you find the person with the scar attractive anyway. Probably just to spur them on even more with ideas that you had a brush with death or something cliche like that." Kiba still seemed puzzled by the idea, but gave a small nod that he was satisfied with that answer for now. Suddenly they heard the voice of their younger friend carry over the cafeteria as Ruby came running over. Yang! The shorter redhead came up to her sister's side and shook her shoulders. If you want to make it to Vale, we got to get on the bulkhead soon. It's the party in a few minutes. Oh, you're right. Good call, sis." Yang devoured the last of her meal before patting her belly satisfied and stood up. "Okay, ready to go." "And where are you two going?" "We're heading to the city to visit a family friend of ours," Yang said with a grin. "I haven't seen her in forever, and I was gonna pop in and say hi. Maybe go and take Bumblebee out for a little drive, let my baby stretch its wheels out for a bit." Ruby nodded with a smile. "I was gonna ask Miss Hefe if she could send in for some parts I need for Crescent Rose. Maybe need some upkeep." Oh, Tenten sat up and raised her hand in excitement. Ruby quickly answered, "Yes, Tenten. If you're going to the weapon shop, can I tag along? I think I figured out what I need to utilize dust better with Kaladin Bulge." "Sure, the more the merrier, but you got to get your weapon quick, because we're gonna go soon." Ruby answered, and Yang grinned as the bunny-haired girl popped out of her seat and ran to her locker. Weiss rolled her eyes. "It figures you a lot would use your weekend to tinker with weapons. I don't know what I expected." "Ah, what's wrong? What's wrong?" Weiss screamed. "Upset you weren't invited for the girls' day out?" "Not at all." Weiss answered Yang's snarky comment with a smug smile and dainty hand on her chest. I'll have you know that while you're just indulging in base desires, I'll be furthering my pursuit of education. I'm going to the museum to see an exhibit of some recent unearthed artifacts they're showing off, and getting some extra credit for Professor Oobleck's class while I'm at it. Yang's expression fell into one of complete boredom as she struggled not to yawn. Wow, I was just joking, but wait to waste a free day, Weiss. Have fun going to a museum by yourself. Keep the bland life going. The heiress leveled a mild glare towards the blonde before turning up her nose. Like I'm desperate to get your approval, and I'll have you know that I'm not going alone. I invited Ruby, but obviously she didn't want to join. The hooded girl muttered out an apology before Weiss continued. Sasuke will be accompanying me because he's interested in this wonderful piece of history as well. A few people spared the Uchiha a look and saw the dejected expression he had. He spoke up with no energy in his voice. She cashed in the favor I owed her for helping with my paper. Don't tell them that! The Shni hushed and crossed her arms haughtily, looking between the sisters. So, enjoying tinkering with your toys, we're off expanding our minds. Well, this is a funny coincidence. They looked over towards Pyrrha and John as they smiled nervously, and the champion continued. We're actually going to the museum as well for the extra credit. We thought it would be a good chance to make up some work we've missed recently. Mostly John, due to the whole cart and errands boy debacle. The blonde smiled awkwardly and waved. Let's have fun. The sheet-eating grin on Yang's face grew as she turned to the stunned Harris. Enjoy expanding your mind while slamming it into a wall. Well, I guess we all got stuff to do today. Kiba stood out of his seat and scratched his head. I got some weird note from the mail office that said I got a package today, but I have to go into the city because it was too big to send up here. Oh, mysterious package, Nora chimed. That sounds like fun. Can me and Ren come along? Sure. What? Yay! The orange-haired girl cheered in joy as she leaped from her seat and started with excitement. Let's go! The bullhead waits! They watched her dash across the cafeteria in an instant as Ren slowly stood up and walked by Kiba with a frown. You could have deterred her and said no. Yeah, but where's the fun in that? The tattooed boy smirked as they followed after Nora and the others started making their way out too. Ruby looked around. Hey, where's Naruto? We tried waking him up, but he kept waving us off and falling asleep. Let him have a day off or whatever. Yang hung back and looked towards Blake as the boy and girl remained seated with book in hand. Blake, last chance. You sure you don't want to come? Blake flipped the page. Enjoy your day out. Come on, bet it'll be fun. I'm quite content where I am today. Really? Really? Fine, whatever. Enjoy your atrophy and solitude. Always do. The blonde bombshell waved her off, and Blake suddenly found herself sitting alone. The cafeteria wasn't quiet because there was still groups of students talking or eating meals, but compared to the usual panic and bedlam she had become used to while sitting with these people, this might as well have been paradise. She would probably migrate back to their room and get comfortable in bed soon enough, get through a massive chunk of this book, decide which books she might want to read next, perhaps get very comfortable ending into that special group of books she has stashed away. Today was going to be a good day, but first she was going to enjoy this piece, a wonderful tasting tea, and a great book. Morning. Blake lowered the book enough to peek over its top and saw Naruto standing on the other side of the table with a smile on his face and a light blue bandana on his head. The whiskered boy waved at his fellow fawness as her amber eyes blinked a few times in silence. She looked back to her story. It's almost noon. Oh, well then, good noon, I guess, he corrected before dropping down in the spot across from her. His hands drummed against the table as he looked around the cafeteria. He caught sight of the black-clad girl giving him a stern glare over her book and looked down at his hands before pulling them back. Sorry. Blake rolled her eyes wearily and inquired as she roamed over the pages. So what are you doing exactly? Just waiting. The blonde replied as he looked around more adamantly for their group of friends. I'll see what the others feel like doing today. Might get some training with the team and work on our combos. Challenge Ruby at a scroll game. I might even sit back and watch John try to hit on Weiss for a few laughs. They're gone. What? I said they're gone. Blake repeated as she took a sip from her teacup. They left for the city about 10 minutes ago. I'm certain they're already gone by now. What? He screamed in shock. Well, why didn't they tell me? Blake sighed and lowered her book, knowing she wasn't going to get any reading done until she answered the frantic boy's questions. They say something about letting you sleep in. Sleep in? He scoffed. Why would they do that? I wasn't even. He cupped his chin and gasped in surprise. Oh no, wait, I was tired, and I totally told them to let me sleep. Damn it. Where did they go? Anywhere fun? Yang and Ruby went to a weapon shop, Weiss went to the museum, your partner went to the post office, and the others broke off into groups and went with them there. The cat faunus answered before resuming her read. I don't know the location or how long they'll be there, but the boy had left and I don't think it'll be back anytime soon. Naruto stood there with a slack jaw and watery eyes, flabbergasted at the idea that his friends would go off and do stuff without him. Granted from what she said, only Ruby and Yang were going somewhere even remotely fun, but still, damn it, he plopped down in his seat and hung his head until it hit table, jostling Blake's cup of tea and earning a pointed glare from the girl. After a moment, his head kept rested on the table, and Blake went back to reading her story in peace. They sat in relative silence, on only the sounds of the others in the cafeteria and the occasional turn of a page breaking the stillness before it returned. Blake noticed Naruto sigh and get out of his seat before walking away. She didn't look up or ask where he was going, as she just hoped she could get her peace and quiet back. Thump. She didn't. Her bow twitched, and she lowered the book completely to see Naruto had come back with a tray of food. His forlorn expression didn't change, even as he bit down into a chicken tender and sighed, "Can't believe they just ditched me. I hardly called letting you sleep at your own request, ditching you." The black-haired girl corrected and received an annoyed side glance from the whiskered boy across from her. She returned it with a pout and glared at his attitude. "Don't you think you can use this time for something beneficial? Why not use it to catch up on your work, or study, or anything else, far away from here?" "I did it all already," he offhandedly replied with a wave of his hand. I do anything more, and I'd be approaching Weiss's level of sucking up. What about you?" he asked the hidden fondness. "Why didn't you go with them?" "None of the activities they were doing piqued my interest. I wasn't keen on going to a weapon shop when my weapon is already fine as it is. There's nothing fun about going to a post office, and you said it best. There's only so much you can do before you're brown nosing like Weiss." "Well said." He chuckled before tossing the rest of the tender in his mouth and moving on to the pasta. Blake watched him devour his mountain meal and stated blankly, "I have no idea how you can stomach eating all of that so easily. I'd be full for an entire week if I ate that much. Hey, I appreciate food. I know how hard it is to cook this stuff, and I know what it's like living with an empty belly. So when I fill up, maybe you just haven't had the right meal to realize that." Naruto spared a teasing smirk and the way of a fry to the girl. "I bet if this was fish, you would be inhaling it like air." Blake sat up in her seat with a miffed pout and an embarrassed hue in her cheeks. "I find fish delicious, and I enjoy it very much when I eat it, but I consider what I do as inhaling it." She was totally convincing the Nazi leader and not herself with that defense. "I'm sure if you had your favorite food in front of you, you would be indulging yourself." "Oh, you're right about that." Naruto agreed sincerely. "If I had a bowl of ramen in front of me right now, I'd be slurping that stuff up in an instant, especially considering how long it's been since I last had some." "So why don't you go get some?" "I've tried. Believe me, I tried." Naruto started counting off his fingers. "That whole time I was under Wilk's thumb and stole stuff around the kingdoms, I looked for some, but never found a good place. Searched through Vale stores, but they're always out. I thought I could get some here, but they don't make any. If I asked for freaking swordfish, they'd have that in an instant. But ramen? God forbid." Naruto grudgingly sighed with a fond look out. "I've gone years without having the heavenly taste of ramen on my tongues again, and I'm under the impression now that it's just a long-lost treasure I may never have again. I have to tide myself over with other meals and food, but it's just not the same." Oh, you poor tortured soul." Blake patronized with every bit of sarcasm evident in her words. "I know you don't actually mean that, but I choose to take your words at face value, so thanks." The boy said back without a wasted moment. He had been around this group long enough to know where he could return their snark with snark of his own. He rested his head on his hand and looked around in boredom. He looked back towards Blake and asked hopefully, "So do you want to do anything today?" "No, thank you." She shot him down immediately. Her words were polite, but the sharp-cut tone conveyed that she really wasn't interested in any idea he had to offer. He persisted. "Oh, come on. There has to be something you want to do for fun. I mean, I know you ain't the most energetic of people, but there has to be something you want to do today." "There is." She lightly rapped one finger against the spine of her book for emphasis. "I'm doing it right now." "Oh, reading. Really, I get you like to read, so you don't have to talk when we're all sitting together, but you're actually you're usually reading too today. It's crazy." "How is that crazy?" "Because reading is the single most important thing to do in the whole world." He did not just say that. Blake slowly closed her book, saving the page she was on with the bookmark, and lowered it to the table. Her shoulders were hiked up a little, and her sharp eyes dug into the ignorant boy across from her. What? He noticed the ire in her voice before he continued. I mean, deciding to read has to be like resorting to talking about the weather with somebody. Oh, I wish we could just talk about the weather and end this stupid and absolutely wrong conversation. Hilarious. But reading is boring, you have to admit that. No, I don't. Blake defended as she became much more passionate about the topic after he referred to it as boring. Reading books is one of the most enjoyable and enriching experiences you can have. You sure about that? Because I haven't found a book that's enjoyable in a very long time. Well, I have very strong suspicion that you've never opened a book that didn't have colored pictures or pop-ups in them before. Naruto was silent before giving a small shrug. Okay, you've got me there, but I have read books Professor Oobleck Import gives us, and I read one for that midterm paper too. They were boring. Those were textbooks. They aren't supposed to be engaging. They're strictly informative. Whatever. Naruto sat back in his seat with a stubborn frown and petulant tone. I couldn't find an interesting book if I had a lifetime to search. You just don't know where to look, Blake said as she huffed and plopped down in her seat with her arms crossed, more affected by the conversation than she expected. If we were in a library, I could find a book even you would enjoy and shut up about. Well, okay then. Blake's eyes widened and she looked up and saw the lopsided smile on the whiskered boy's face. Not exactly my ideal day, but better than nothing. Let's see you pick something out from the library. Blake gasped as her shoulders slumped in horror. She shook her head furiously. No, that's not what I meant. Too late, it's happening. No. He grabbed her wrist and smiled. Let's go. No. And they dashed off. Blake just having enough time to grab her own book before it was too late. Hunting. So you are not sure what was sent or who sent it to you? Nope. Just got a message from the office that said the Vale post office had something for me. Kiba said with a wave of his scroll as he and Ren walked along the sidewalk, with Nora happily skipping in front of them. They said it was urgent and that I need to pick it up today. Ren cupped his chin. That is peculiar. That sounds like fun, Nora blurted out as she turned on her feet and started skipping backwards while holding the conversation. Maybe you have some kind of secret admirer that sent you this huge gift that you need to get right away. Oh, or maybe you had a secret adversary that sent you some kind of bomb, and when you go to pick it up, it blows up. You don't have any super secret admirers slash adversaries we need to know about, do you, Kiba? He shrugged. But I did start some fights when I was a kid and in training school, but I also might have gotten some much disturbed attention with my rugged good looks and charm. Ha! Nora chortled and held her sides while laughing at the tattooed boy's statement. She struggled through her uncontrolled laughter. That's funny. Come on, Kiba, be serious. I was totally being serious. Then you're delusional, silly. Kiba frowned and looked at Ren for support as the pink-eyed boy nodded. I thought you were kidding as well. Whatever, Kiba grumbled as they rounded the corner and spotted the Vale post office. They approached and Kiba pulled a hand out of his jacket to go for the door. Let's see what all the fuss is. They immediately went silent as they heard a crash and clatter out inside the post office, followed with yelling and screams. The teens froze in place and listened to the pandemonium that was occurring just past the doors. They spared each other a look and focused back with feared eyes. They prepared for any fight that might happen when they opened the doors. Bark! The doors popped open and something barreled through fast enough to knock Kiba into the street. Ren and Nora looked back in surprise just in time to see a massive white creature looking over the boy's down form. They had thought that maybe a Grim had invaded until... Kiba laughed through the incensed licking covered his face as he pushed on the big furry neck holding him back. Stop it, and come on, your breath smells like balls. Well, I'm not wrong. Kiba pushed against the furry neck and made the huge canine shuffle back. The massive, happy dog sat down and panted as Kiba sat up and started rubbing his ears affectionately. Akamaru, I can't believe you're here. Ruff. Well, I didn't think you'd come visit by getting sent by mail. He laughed as the dog's tail wagged back and forth rapidly, delighted to be reunited with his best friend again. Kiba hugged Akamaru and the dog barked again in joy before he asked, How did you get here anyway, and what's with the collar? Akamaru barked and turned his head to reveal a note tied to the collar. Kiba flicked it out and read its contents. Hey there, little brother. It's Hana. I'm entering at a hospital close to home, so I can come visit for a few months, which means when I see you again at the end of the semester, you better have survived. Beacon, you got it? So when I got back to the shelter, I found that everything seemed about the same. The animals were causing chaos. Mom was screaming at them and shutting them up in an instant. But the only difference was Akamara was totally depressed, call it a bleeding heart. But I can't stand seeing him mope like that. And knowing you two, you were probably missing him as well. So I thought I'd send him over to you for a while and cheer him up. Now get reacquainted and cheerful and happy and everything, but remember that he can't stay with you forever. Man up and send him back home when it's time, and keep the collar on him. I know how much he hates it, but Vale's a big place. Survive the rest of the semester and we'll hold a big party for you when we see you over the break. You better survive and stay safe, or me and Mom will totally kill you. Love you, Hannah. Stupid, Kiba muttered with a big grin before smiling and scratching Akamaru's head. Guess you're staying with us for a few days, huh, buddy? You excited? Rough. Good, because I've met a lot of new people that I want you to meet. Oh my god, it's a puppy! Akamaru jumped up to attention as Nora came running in with a massive grin on her face. Yep, this is Akamaru. Akamaru, these are my friends, Nora and Ren. Say hi. Ruff. Ah! Nora cheered before she immediately buried herself under the big dog's neck and mumbled into its fur. Hey, he's so fluffy and cute and adorable. I love him. She pulled back and looked directly at the boy. Hi there, Akamaru. It's nice to meet you. Can we be friends? He answered her question by quickly licking her face and causing the ginger girl to giggle and laugh. She happily hugged him tighter, but Akamaru didn't mind at all as he continued panting and wagging his tail at the attention. Ren stood on the sidewalk and watched the scene in shock and confusion. It was a dog. That thing. Dogs weren't that big. They couldn't be that big. That was almost the size of a human. Heck, that thing was probably bigger than Nora, and it was Kiba's pet. The usual taciturn boy opened the door and looked inside the post office. There was a giant crate that had been smashed open from the inside. The chairs and lights were flipped over, and people all over the room were panting or moaning after trying to chase the massive dog. And that thing would be at Beacon for an unspecified amount of time. Hey, Ren, come meet our new best friend. He's so fluffy. Oh, dear Noctix, but better than him. Hunting. Blake sat at the table, her face in her hands and regretting filling her thoughts. She wanted a quiet day just to read, enjoy some time for herself, anything. Instead, holy crap, look at the size of these things, the blonde announced as he held up a book that needed both hands to support it. They're huge. Who had the time to write this? I bet you could break a Grimm's armor with this thing. She sat there, cursing the slip of the tongue that had made Naruto think that she was offering to show him some books. If she could go back in time just a bit earlier to when they were in the cafeteria, she'd snap her past self's neck and take her place. Didn't matter if that created a paradox or whatever, that Blake had forfeited her chance to enjoy a day of peace. She got what was coming to her. What about some of these? Naruto approached with several books in hand. Electric Sheep and How Your Entire Understanding of Your Personal Reality is Wrong. A Trip to the Island of Hunting Men. Virtual Boys and the Girls He Attempts to Court. Should these be in a school library? Biggest library has a vast array of books spanning all different genres and topics. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that there are enough books here for each student to read. And do you think they have comic books anywhere? Okay, Blake stood out of her chair and started for the exit. I'm leaving. Wait. Naruto reached out before she walked off. What happened to showing me a book that was so good it would shut me up? You took that out of context, Blake mumbled with an annoyed glower. That was just a throwaway statement I made in haste while we had an argument. I wasn't making an offer. I didn't say we should go to the library. I'm leaving. If you leave, you're never going to change my mind about books. That somehow put an instant halt in Blake's grumpy march out. The black-clad girl remained frozen as a cheeky smile came over Naruto's face. He crossed his arms and smiled wider even though he knew she couldn't see it. If you're so certain books are great, then we won't have a hard time picking one out. You can prove me wrong and know you converted someone to this wonderful hobby or whatever, but if you can't or walk away, I might just brag about it to everyone. She turned back fast enough that her wavy ebony hair billowed with her movement as her sharp eyes bore into him. Naruto stood with a grin and raised his eyebrows back and forth, awaiting her response. Blake was silent as she contemplated what would happen if she just walked. She could go back to reading her book in peace, but he would win this silly one-sided bet or wager or whatever it was. That didn't bother her at all. The boasting and bragging to her teams and comrades was the part she was dreading. It would be relentless. Him with his smug smile, rebounding off of Yang with her terrible jokes, Weiss huffing and shaking her head in disappointment, probably saying something about her lack of initiative to put him in his place, and Ruby suggesting they try searching as a team, offering to invite the rest of Noctix and probably Juniper too. Annoying deal now, or dismay later. Blake pouted before she turned on her heels and walked past Naruto. You and Yang both caused me so much grief I can't even begin to comprehend. Maybe you were both born under the same irritating star, or maybe the hair color is just the characteristic of dread. Naruto blinked and asked honestly while pulling on a strand of hair peeking out from his bandana, "What's wrong with my hair?" She didn't even bother to answer as she walked up to a bookshelf and started pursuing the selection of books. If she was going to be here, then she was going to use the chance to help herself as well. Skim through a few choices and see what the library has to offer. This might not be the worst way to spend an evening after all. She walked up to her side. Naruto walked up to her side as she picked out the book and already started reading into it. The Whiskered Boy watched in amazement as Blake became completely engrossed in the story. Whether the books were interesting or not, it was pretty amazing how she could devote so much of her attention into them so quickly, like she just felt her imagination and the words take over for a moment. She must really adore them. She has really pretty eyes. Wonder why he was only noticing that now. What was he doing? Alright, books. Blake had apparently drifted back off into her own little world and left him unsupervised. He started picking out other books and looking over their covers to see if any piqued his interest. He picked several and held them out for the resident expert to decide. How about these ones? They seem like they're pretty good. Blake spared a look up to see what Naruto had offered before tilting her head quizzically. She shook her head. I'm not sure those would be very good choices for you. I don't see you enjoying stories about political investigations or character dramas about widowed single mothers. Naruto looked over the books and noticed the reviews and awards covering the hardback. But there are a lot of reviews and praises on these things. Does that mean something? A rare, amused smile came over the cat faun's face and noted, "You understand that's what you're doing is literally judging a book by its cover, right?" Naruto blinked in realization and lowered them as a hue of embarrassment joined his frown. "Besides, it doesn't matter what accolades or reviews it has. People have different tastes and likes in what they read or watch. In the end, it's up to the individual to bite the bullet and plunge into that experience themselves." Oh, Naruto blinked, impressed by the girl's reasoning as he looked the book over a few times. His eyebrow peaked. "What if you're not going off the cover then? How do you know I wouldn't want to read it?" "Because I read them both, and while I think they're both good, even I have to admit that they were both a little long-winded and dull. It's kind of like one of Professor Port's lectures. Good story, but boring detail. You can read them if you want, but I'm not sure you'll enjoy them." Blake closed her book and shelved it before browsing again. "You strike me more of an adventurous thrill story with heroes and consequences, the kind of book Ruby likes too." That's a pretty fair assumption. He had to agree with the girl's deduction. He watched her pull out another book and start glancing over the pages as she instantly dove into it. Okay, there was impressive, and then there was just showing off. After a moment, his face scrunched up in bewilderment. "Hey, weren't you gonna help me pick out a book? That's gonna be pretty hard when you've got your nose buried in another one like that." "I'm gonna pick out a book. But I'm not going to come over this entire library and make a collection of choices to offer," Blake stated evenly while focusing on the book. "I'm going to go over the books I've read from my memory and make decisions about what I think you would enjoy the most, and I think more certainly while I'm reading." "Oh." Blake noticed the dissatisfied tone in his voice and the bored frown on his face. She rolled her eyes. "Instead of waiting for me, why don't you look around and browse yourself? You might find something you'd like or learn something new." Naruto reluctantly agreed to the idea and started filling the books away again. He opted instead to look over the tomes that covered the shelves and see what he could find. He couldn't judge by its cover, but they had to be intriguing enough to get his attention. And that's kind of a double standard now that he thought about it. He pulled one out and mindlessly skimmed through the pages while talking. "Picked from your memory? Why do I feel like that's a really big bank to pick from?" He got a knowing, coy smile from the girl for only a second before she went back to reading. He felt exhausted just imagining it. "You really like books, don't you?" "I find a certain calmness when I read, always have, as long as I can remember." "And you got a ton of books to choose from too, not just the library. I've seen the personal collection you got building up in there as well." That was enough to earn a worried look from the beauty as she lost focus of her reading. "You've seen my books?" "Yeah, a lot of them. When Ruby and Yang invite us in before we go off to do something fun or whatever." Blake seemed to stiffen at that reveal as Naruto kept talking. Kiba smells the air and heaves because of the mix of girly smell and perfume. John stutters like a moron when he sees Wise's empty bed, and Yang starts goading him into doing something. Blake tried to hide her discomfort behind the book at listening to someone else enter her room without her knowing. "And I see your huge stack and rows of books in the drawers, except for this one book that was filed behind the other books like it was hidden or whatever. Some book about ninjas of slam." Naruto's whole body tensed in shock. The ears hidden beneath his bandana twitched from the loud clap of the book slamming shut. He blinked in surprise and looked at the girl that had shut it so loud that it echoed through the library and startled others around them. The usual calm and aloof girl looked up at him, her amber eyes hardened in contempt at the blonde beside her before she spoke in a stern, unyielding tone. Forget that book. Forget you ever saw it. Forget those words completely, and make sure you never mention them to anyone else for any reason. Are we clear? Clear? Yes, ma'am. Good. Blake switched out the book and opened a new one. Keep browsing. And Naruto quickly complied, not willing to push the girl's buttons after that sudden display. He suddenly remembered how scary women could be when they wanted to be, like how a certain red-haired woman acted when he didn't eat his vegetables as a kid, or how tempting could be when their laundry had started to stink up and no one wanted to be the one washing them, or when Yang was being Yang. Oh geez, now he was really wishing the others had invited him to whatever they were doing. Hunting. Now, as you can see by the fading of the paint and aged stones, these carvings and paintings are estimated to be hundreds, if not thousands of years old, drawn by ancestral clans and nomad groups well before the defensive boundaries of the kingdoms. In fact, these ancient depictions tell of the precursor of a modern kingdoms that people boarded off to protect themselves, as well as the advance and attacks of the Grim and the initial separation from the faunus population. Now, in the next exhibit, John, huh? And John was startled awake and stifled a yawn and rubbed his eyes. He looked to his side to see the stern frown of the Schnee hairs and the judging look of his champion companion. He straightened up and tried to face them. Sorry, guys. This whole exhibit wasn't as exciting as I thought I had thought. Pyrrha's looked immediately changed to one of sympathy as she nodded. Understand this isn't the most engaging of activities, John, but you promised that you would stick with it and write up a paper for Dr. Ublik for extra credit, so you can't falter now. I know, I'm sorry. The lanky blonde apologized while rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. I swear, I'm not doing this on purpose. It's just I thought since this was extra credit for history, it'd be a little more energetic, like Ublik, but the flat voice and the stories make me feel like I'm in Professor Port's class. Well, you need to buck up and get yourself together. Weiss lectured with her hands on her hips and a scowl directed at the taller boy. I don't need your fatigue and laziness affecting me while I'm trying to absorb everything, okay? Her statement and tone left no room for argument. I'm sorry. John apologized earnestly, earning a slight surprised look from Weiss at the simple admission without any attempt to bolster himself. He gently patted his cheek. I think I need a drink or something to keep me awake. That's a good idea, Pierre agreed. There was a cafe open before the exhibit started. Why don't we go grab something to drink? Definitely. The two partners headed back the way they came. Do you two want anything? Sasuke shook his head. I'm good, but thanks for offering. Weiss was silent for a moment before looking back at the exhibit. I'll take whatever coffee they have. Perfect. John smiled and followed Pierre back to the cafe. We'll be back in a sec. Weiss huffed and crossed her arms as she looked over the exhibit again, annoyed that she wasn't actually taking the time to review the image and professional notifications underneath. She stood there in silence before she noticed Sasuke step up to her side. You're not upset he's not hitting on you anymore, are you? The Schnee girl seemed appalled by the mere thought and swallowed a gag. Her head and ponytail whipped around to face him with anger. Absolutely not. The moment that Iritin decided to forfeit any chances of trying to date me, I'll break into song and dance. Weiss clarified. I was just surprised to see he wasn't trying to make an excuse for himself. A smile came on her face at the idea. Maybe something in his brain was fixed after getting rattled around. Maybe. Sasuke agreed as they stood together in silence and looked over the photographs taken of the dig site where all the artifacts were found. Photographs of ancient drawings scrawled over innumerable walls from who knows how long ago. Can I ask you something? Weiss inquired of her companion as he turned to her. Why did you come with me? I mean, besides owing me a favor, if you really didn't wish to come here, you didn't have to. The shorter girl looked up at him quizzically. So why? I was interested in seeing what this exhibit had to offer. The forming of the kingdoms, the beginning of dust utilization. Sasuke looked up at the drawing of people taking up arms against the Grim for the first time. The origin of hunters. Sasuke's face changed into a more focused stare at the pictures before asking in return, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you want to come here? I mean, from what I gather, you hardly need any extra credit in any of your classes. So why? Weiss seemed concerned by that question before she blushed bashfully. Well, I suppose if I have to admit it, this would be a trip to indulge in my success. Duchiya looked at her oddly before she motioned to the entire ancient artifact exhibit around them. All these pictures and artifacts and exhibits, they're here because we succeeded in taking down Felton Wilk's operation. That gathered the Chiha's full attention as the ivory-haired beauty looked around in admiration. This exhibit was one of the reasons Wilkes was in Vale in the first place. It was supposed to be covertly transferred from Vacuo to Mistral without any unwanted attention from the underworld. Considering the person they were asking for assistance, they obviously made the wrong choice. But after he was apprehended by the police, the exhibit was stopping off here before going over to Mistral, and I wanted to see it for myself. The results of our efforts. That shows that even though we might not receive the praise other huntsmen and huntresses would receive from doing it, we still did something good to help people. What would her sister think of her if she found out she had a part in the biggest crime takedown of the century? Even Winter would have praised her for her initiative and bravery, and that brought a smile to Weiss's face. Sasuke didn't respond, but merely smiled in agreement. As the duo were edged out by another group of visitors, they moved over to the next set of images depicting ancient and unknown stories. The humans and faunas were bordered off by a massive, horrifying darkness that pushed them to either side of the wall. The humans were armed with dust and weapons to defend themselves, while the faunas charged forward and appeared as monsters as the abominations they faced, and strange white figures standing inside the field of darkness, as if they were immune from it. This was something no one in recent decades would have ever gotten to see because of the destruction of art, something untouched and unseen by mankind for hundreds of years. The beginning of civilization and the wars against the Grim. Seems the Faunas were even worse back in those days than they are now. Why silently admired the strange sketches of their ancestors. She inclined her head and thought, the people that protected civilization back then against everything, do you think they would be happy to know that we've made it this far? Weiss laughed a little at the idea before putting a hand on her hip. I bet they would be relieved if they were alive today. Better tools to assist in the job, more people joining the cause, and they'd probably be praised much more for their heroics now than they ever were back then. They never did it for the praise. Weiss looked over to see Sasuke staring up at the exhibit with a complicated expression. He wasn't showing the smile he usually had around her or the others. He had settled into a frown, his eyes narrowing at the image of humans fighting against the Grim. They knew they would never be praised, they would never be rewarded, that they may never be thanked for their duty, but they did it because they knew they were the only ones able to bear the weight of the job given to them. They only had this duty, no matter how hard it was. Weiss just stared at Sasuke silently and took notice of his tone and expression. He seemed different talking like this, not as cheerful or bright. This was solemn. She had seen it once before when he was talking about his parents and family. For a moment, his face changed before immediately turning back into a smiling mask. But why was this so different? Why was it when he spoke like this, he seemed genuine, different? We're back. Sasuke snapped back to reality and forced the smile back on his face as they turned to greet John and Pyrrha again. The two partners brandished the refreshments they had brought. John held out a can of coffee for the Harris and grinned. Your order, milady. Oh joy! Just as she thought that was over with, she sighed and just held her hand out, awaiting him to put it there. John smiled and chuckled awkwardly before placing it in her hand. She popped it open and had a taste, not quite appreciating the bland flavor and severe lack of caffeine. However, he did buy it for her. Thank you. This earned a smile from the lanky blonde before he turned back to look over the exhibit again with his partner. The Harris continued sipping from her can as Sasuke stepped to her side. Another good reason to come. Nice company. Hunting. Blake leaned back against the bookshelf and found herself enjoying the sudden moment of tranquility. The sun started falling in its arc and shined a few warm beams of light over her on the room, the afternoon heat making the library feel remarkably cozy and warm. If Blake was a weaker woman and didn't mind the stereotype, she'd probably curl up into a ball and nap. However, by the looks of it, someone was certainly indulging in the lazy atmosphere, although she wasn't sure how, considering how late he slept in. Blake lowered her book and sighed before walking over to join him at the table. She took notice of the book he was sleeping on before nodding off. What he wasn't blocking off with his head and arms seemed very detailed and even complex, and the cover was heavy, but she couldn't quite make out the title. Uh-oh, he's drooling. He will not get that on the book. Blake quickly reached over and pulled the book out from under him, effectively stealing his pillow as his head thumped on the tabletop. The bow-wearing girl examined the book, covering it protectively from the sleepy fox. The bandana-wearing fighter raised his head and yawned before rubbing his eyes. Good noon. It's afternoon now. Whatever. He stretched out his arms and they shivered a little before falling to the chair's side. Weary blue eyes looked around before he asked his fellow faunus, what happened? Did I fall asleep? Yes, the warmth and reading lulled you asleep pretty easily. Not to grumble in annoyance and scratch his ears as Blake slid her book away to look at the one she had produced from the blonde. She read over the page curiously and noticed the content before flipping over to the title, the social exploration of how children did or did not make friends. A book on delivering into psychology set in children. Blake looked at him oddly. I didn't take you as the type to understand the confusing and contradictory thought mechanics of the adolescent. I'm not. I thought it was going to be a book about making friends or whatever. A big, big book about friends. He finally wiped the last of the sleep and fatigue off of his face as he faced Blake again. But there were so many weird terms and concepts I've never even heard of that I started getting lost, and then I felt tired. Then why did you keep trying to read it? Blake begged the question. Because I wanted to learn something new. Naruto repeated in his best Blake voice, apparently doing an adequate job because he got a stern pout from the amber-eyed girl, and that just made a cheeky grin and chuckle settle over his features. Just so you know, this doesn't help the interesting book argument you're trying to build. Blake glared at him some more before looking back down at the book she had saved. She quietly read over the page before asking, So why did you pick this book out of all the others? Personal interest, he answered simply. Oh, Blake asked, her interest piqued. And what might you have staked in reading a book about children and making friends? You sound curious. You ever heard of what curiosity did to the cat? Did you ever hear that cats have 9 lives? Is that just a wives' tale, or have you tested that out? Can we stop with this silly banter before it gets out of hand? Sure, but maybe I got the book out to help you. Naruto proposed with a shrug of his shoulder. I gotta be worried. For my antisocial friend. Blake's hair bristled a little, and she stomped her foot in annoyance before taking a deep breath and calming herself down. She looked his book over and pointed something out from the page. I'm not antisocial, from what this book says. I'm better categorized as being introverted. Naruto scoffed. Duh, I could tell you that. The ninja book should have been your first clue. Introverted, Blake interrupted. Not what you're thinking about, introvert. Oh, my bad. Naruto actually seemed sincere and apologized to the girl before tilting his head. Wait, what does that mean? It means I'm someone that feels drained by constant social encounters and attention. Blake explained as she read from the book. Introverts can feel more energized and willing during solidarity in moments of creative or quiet thinking, sometimes misconstrued as shyness, social phobias, or antisocial behavior. Blake said with her sharp eyes looking up at the blonde as he shivered away nervously. I would be better categorized as an introvert. I doubt I would ever survive on a team with an attention lover like Yang or a glory hog like Weiss if I was totally antisocial. Naruto hummed in agreement before he looked off. He seemed deep in thought before asking Blake, what would I be? Blake looked back down, already knowing the answer, but better to give the explanation from the book. You're more extroverted, she followed up. You get more energy by being around others and interacting with them. Makes sense considering how crushed you seemed to be earlier when you found out they left without you. Huh, that's weird. The blonde settled back in his seat and noticing the questioning look he got from the reserved girl, his shoulders slumped in thought. When I was first coming to begin, before I met all of you, I was dreading meeting new people, like I was worried and anxious and didn't think I could talk to anyone and everything. Why is that? Well, no one has to be solely put into one category. It's not just one or the other, Blake answered. This is just an example specially probably given to parents to help them try and cope with understanding children. But it's more than that. Just look at Ruby. Ruby? Yes, Blake nodded while imagining her rambunctious red leader. You know how flustered and nervous she gets when she's caught off guard or meets someone new. She's basically trips over herself and doesn't know how to properly act in new scenarios. But when she's with friends, she's like an entirely different girl. She's silly, she's weird, she's social. She wanted to prove she can be strong and diligent and indecisive enough to be a leader. Sometimes she's terrified of being forced on, and other times she can thrive when she is where she is. People are complicated like that. She had a point. Naruto remembered first meeting the short-hooded girl and just how much of an emotional and social mess she was. Hell, he actually felt more confident and better about his situation after seeing her worry and befriend her. But now whenever he saw her, he could see a confident, if shy girl coming out of her shell. It's not as easy as claiming someone as one kind of person or another, Blake said as she looked over the page again. People grow and develop their personalities based on many different factors: their environment, their daily lives, the people they talk with, the people they meet, religion, education, parental guidance, parental neglect, sibling relationship, friendly relationships, and most of this can happen when they're just children. A lot can go into how people are molded into adults. Blake looked up from the book and tapped the page. And how we interact with people and friends as we grow up. Naruto frowned and slumped a little further into his chair as he seemed reluctant to dive back into the topic, but the boy took a deep breath and just shook his head. I didn't have any friends growing up, and for the longest times I thought I never would. Blake closed the book as she realized she didn't need to refer to it anymore. Why is that? Lots of stuff. We moved around a lot when I was growing up. Parents trying to find good jobs and homes and stuff. Another pointed out in the direction of the city. I was born here in Vale, and we lived here for a while, but I remember living and growing up in Mistral better. We moved so much that I never really got to stay in one school for more than a few years at most. That's especially hard, moving is tough on kids when they crave stability. I got used to it after a while. It happened so often that I just considered each new house a stop off before we had to go somewhere else again. Never really considered any of them a home. His thoughts went back to that conversation he had with Sasuke about when he started considering Beacon and all the people he had met as home. A faint smile covered his face before he chuckled. I used to play a lot with kids wherever I ended up. We kicked balls and played hunter and crook on the playground. Everything. Except sometimes parents would come over and pull their kids away from me because, you know. He looked up and Blake immediately knew he was referring to the top of his head, and she quickly realized what he meant, a frown of anger forming on her face. Parents pulled the children away from him because he was fondest. She spat out. That's disgusting. It didn't happen as often as you'd think, but it did happen, Naruto said without any inflection in his voice, as he merely retold his memory to the girl. I remember kids looking so confused and startled when they got pulled away by the adults, but as I grew older and started going to different schools, the kids reacted the same way, staying away from me and sneering, like they just started doing the same stuff their parents did like it was natural. And prejudice passed down through families and generations, something else to blame on how people still act like racist and bigots even now, Blake said with disdain as the topic had obviously touched a nerve with her. Some people don't even hate and discriminate against fondness for personal reasons. They were just raised and thought to hate. Her face twisted with a grimace. It's terrible. Naruto nodded with a somber look on his face before a small smile took its place. Yeah, but that's all in the past now. There are good people out there, probably more good than bad if we look hard enough, and we see some of them every day. The anger that had settled over Blake's face slowly dissipated, and her shoulders started to relax. Her feelings of fury and disgust slowly mixed with the feelings of joy and relief she had when she was with her team, and the camaraderie she was slowly forming with all her new friends now too. The fondness girl relented and admitted the truth. I never had friends either, but unlike you, I never really tried to go out and make them myself. I had accepted that I might never make friends, and I found solace in reading books and exploring that imagination. For some time I believed I had someone else in special, but soon enough I realized that wasn't someone I can stay besides anymore. Now I understand now I find myself surrounded by people that I never believed I would befriend. I'm reading less and less now. A small smile came to Blake's face, and I care less about it while I'm with them. My teams know I'm fondness, all of them. Blake looked at him in shock as he could only laugh. I didn't even have to tell them. Tenten figured it out on her own, and Kiba knew from the moment we met. I couldn't even be angry or upset at either of them. Tenten kept quiet, waiting for me to tell her herself, and Kiba didn't even know I was keeping it a secret. He chuckled dryly before taking the psychological book from Blake and getting out of his chair. How's that for Veronica? So focused on keeping them hidden that our teams might just figure it out on their own? I think you might have just been a little too lazy and didn't hide it well enough. Blake responded, a tinge of unease in her voice, with the possibility that her team may have discovered her secret by themselves. She doubted it, but apparently it could happen. Kiba's not exactly the sharpest knife, so if he could figure it out, you might have done something wrong. That's rich, Dutty joked while he reached up on his toes to file the book away. What's that say when he's also figured you out as a fondness too? He did what? Blake panicked, her eyes going wide and jumping out of her seat. She immediately dashed over and pulled on Naruto's shoulder to face him. Did you say he... No, Blake, wait, I didn't crash. Several groups looked around the library, or groups around the library turned, and the head librarian walked over to see Naruto and Blake standing over a pile of toppled books. His head turned from the tilted books to the two teens that looked like they were about to embrace each other tightly before the literature of avalanche had interrupted. He crossed his arms in annoyance and glared at the duel. It was totally her fault. Hunting. Ruby sat on the edge of the sidewalk and just watched her feet paddle and bounce off the asphalt. She blew a raspberry and pouted as the sense of boredom continued to creep up on her. How was this fair? They got to go off and have fun, and she had to sit here and wait? That's not cool at all. She was a leader now. Yang shouldn't be able to order her around like this so easily. If they didn't get back in the next minute, she was going to be a real pain in the butt for her big sister for the rest of. Yeah! And Tenten's frightened scream echoed across the street as the yellow motorcycle came to a screeching halt in front of Ruby. Oh, good, they were back. The hooded girl stood up and walked over to greet her sister and the girl that had her arms tightened wrapped around Yang's stomach for safety. The busty blonde sat up, pulling the goggles off her eyes and waving her head around with a content sigh. She ran a hand through her hair. Oh, felt good to be back on my baby again. Hey sis, how awesome did we look? Don't know, Ruby answered with a frown and expressed crossing of her arms. You went off the street and left me here alone, like a jerkface. Oh, no, didn't be like that. I was just showing Tenten how fast Bumblebee could go. Can't stretch the rubber if we're just gonna do laps around the street. She looked back at the girl, still clutching onto her for dear life. Speaking of which, what'd you think? The helmet Yang had given her had shivered and jumped along with Tenten's chattering jaw. The weapon lover slowly forced herself to let go of the boxer and undo the helmet with shaking hands. Once the helmet clattered on the street, Tenten struggled to lift her leg off the motorcycle and onto stationary ground. She steadied herself and gave a weak nod. It was fun. Got to do that again. Whoa. Ruby held Tenten up from squashing her and struggling to make sure she didn't fall over. Yang nodded, picking her helmet up and putting it on her head. Yeah, Ruby was the same way when I first got it. Some people just can't handle the adrenaline. Stay here while I put Bumblebee away and we can head out. The bike revved and started forward as Yang rounded the corner to store her precious bike in its reserve. When she was out of sight, Tenten let out a nervous whimper and found her footing again. I see why you passed up taking the first ride with her. Does she realize there are speed limits and other cars around her? We don't think so, Ruby answered with a sad shake of her head as she helped steady the older girl, and we're too scared to tell her to slow down. Why do you think I run everywhere I go? And I wasn't envious enough about your semblance already. Tenten laughed, standing off the shorter girl and nodding at her assistants. If we ever have to switch semblances, I totally call yours. Does that mean I can have yours? Ruby asked excitedly with a big smile. Because I want to make armors and weapons and stuff fly out of my hands. That would be cool. It's a deal. Next time we come back, we're bringing Weiss and Blake down to try it out. They spotted the Yang making her way back, and the girls started heading to the center of the city. They had made plans with the others that around this time they would reconvene, get a late lunch / early dinner, and then head back to Beacon. A nice end to this simple Saturday evening. Ruby crossed her arms with a childish pout and turned away with a huff from her older sister. I can't believe you ditched me again to go on a joyride. I thought you'd love me. Well, shows what I know. Yang groaned. Of course I love you. You're my baby sister. I asked if you wanted to ride, but you said you were all right. The blonde looked at the shorter girl excessively and pointed back at the way they came. Would you have rather run by our side and make it a race? Because even I think that's a stupid and dangerous idea. I'm just hurt that you told me to stay out like that. Ruby's pout deepened and she turned further away from Yang. I could have been attacked or mugged. Well, considering the last mugging you were a part of ended with you getting accepted into Beacon, I'm not exactly worried for you. Ah, how cruel! Ruby mimicked crying and her bottom lip quivered. I was abandoned by my dear sister. What will people say? Ruby then looked back at Yang. What's that gonna think? Oh, so that's what this is about? Yang sighed in defeat and plumped her face as Tenten watched the show with intrigue. How they were performing this cheesy melodrama scene while still walking baffled her. Yang rolled her eyes in a huff before repeating a familiar line in the standard monotone. What do I have to do to make you keep this quiet? Yes, a sibling guilt trip, the perfect way to ensure that she got a tasty treat or sweet gift in return for her absolute silence. Works every time. Ruby stood back up and straight and tapped her chin. Let's see. She thought long and hard about what she wanted to ask of Yang, already knowing it would probably be the biggest dessert at the restaurant they went to, but enjoying the growing despair on Yang's face. She shrugged. Well, I'm just so traumatized and sad. I think the only thing that can ease the pain is puppy! Ruby dashed with a flurry of petals behind her as Yang and Tenten blinked in surprise. They followed the trail and looked over to see Ruby and the rest of their friends standing around something next to the street. Ruby was on her knees, cooing and talking in a silly voice, as Nora was lying over it as flat as she could. They got closer to see they were surrounding a thing. The massive creature that looked like a dog was panting happily at the love he was getting as Ruby scratched his back all the way up in his ears. They stared at the scene in disbelief before Yang finally spoke. What the hell is that? Yang, look, it's a dog. Ruby hugged the dog's head and snuggled into his furry neck happily. He's so warm and cute, and look at his funny face and floppy ears. He's adorable. Tenten looked on in confusion before stepping over to her partner's side as he was just as lost as her. She hoped for the best. So, what's going on? The dog is Sasuke's side. Akamaru, apparently. Akamaru? The bunny-haired girl immediately looked over to her tattooed teammate that watched over the dog with pride. The Akamaru, the one you kept telling us about back home with the other animals. Yep, this is him. Kiba nodded. Why do you look so surprised? Nothing. But when you said you raised a dog and he was your best friend, I never thought he'd be so... Titten paused. Well fed. Well, a proper diet and exercise can do that for a dog, Kiba said with a puffed out chest at the attention his best friend was getting. He'll be staying with us for a few days. He is? Oh well. Pyrrha awkwardly smiled and tried to see the bright side of the situation. It certainly seems like you all will be having fun for the next few days, and that's nice, right? The irked glares from Sasuke and Tenten immediately shut the champion up as she looked away in embarrassment. John seemed torn between stepping away for safety and taking the plunge by getting petting the beast's maiden. Does he bite? He shouldn't, not unless I tell him to, or he feels like it. Kiba just chuckled. That's really up to him, but I trust his judgment if he thinks someone deserves to get bit. Oh, these next couple of days were looking less and less promising for Noctix. Okay, I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. Wise finally cracked and shook her head. That can't be a dog. It's too big. I've never seen a purebred or a mutt ever grow to this size. The Harris looked around for hope that someone else would see the insanity of this moment, because obviously her partner wasn't. This creature is something out of a fantasy novel, something you ride into battle. And funny you mentioned that. Kiba laughed before whistling Akamaru. The white dog immediately jumped to its feet, surprising the others with its speed and the fact it effortlessly lifted the two girls on its back. The wild teen smirked and nodded. Go for a run. Ruff. Akamaru darted off down the street while the excited cries from Ruby and Nora followed as they braced themselves on his back. The others watched in shock and disbelief as the massive dog sprinted down the street with incredible speed and started leaping over cars and other people with ease. They watched in disbelief, amazing agility and mobility before he circled around and sprinted past them and down the other end of the street. The grins and whoops from Nora and Ruby showing just how much fun they were having. I started training with him when we were just young, and we did it all the time until I came to Beacon. Akamaru could kill a few Grim by himself if he needed to. You're kidding, right? No, he has his aura unlocked and everything. Even has a semblance that works tandem with mine. My best friend. You trained a dog to the point where he unlocked his aura, gained a semblance, and can fight Grim and carry people on his back. He usually only carries me, but I think he's taken a liking to those two. He whistled again and waited for the big dog to return. Come back, buddy. We're going. The dog was sprinting back towards the group of teens, and they prepared to step back before he pulled the brakes and stopped in front of them while catching his breath. The two girls laughed happily on his back, toppled over in heaps on the ground. Nara popped up. Woo! That was amazing, Kiba. Let's do it again. Gotta ask Akamaru. Ruby stumbled up to her feet, her hood pulled over her head in a wrinkly mess. Before she pulled it down to reveal her hair had stuck back from the speed, she grinned. Yang, I think I got the feeling you get from riding Bumblebee because that was so much fun. This is crazy, Weiss denied in the distraught tone as her arms waved around wildly. If this animal can do all of those things, then that just proves that it's less likely to actually be a dog. I mean, what on remnant The hairy squealed when the animal in question had shuffled over to her and plopped down on its butt, looking directly up at her. The ivory-haired girl was so caught off guard that she looked to her friends for assistance before spotting Kiba's smirking face. Looks like he's telling you to try him out yourself. Go ahead, pet him and see if he's not a dog. I'm not going to. Wise frowned, looking between all of them and the dog that stared up at her expectantly as she started fuming. She relented. Fine, I'll do it. I am so suing all of you if this goes horrible. Weiss gulped and slowly raised a hand towards Akamaru, the dog leaning back at the quick speed her hand was making towards him. She slowed down and proceeded forward cautiously before stopping just a few inches from contact. Weiss seemed like she could start sweating at any moment. While she started to fidget, her voice cracked in a nervous squeak. He's not going to bite me, right? Told you that wasn't up to me. What about shots? He's had his shots. He's clean. You're good. You said he came by mail. What if he has fleas or a dog flu or some kind of less stalling, more nothing up? Fine. Weiss took the plunge and reached forward as her hand landed on Akamaru's head between his ears. She had scrunched her eyes closed in fearful anticipation before she realized nothing bad had happened. She slowly opened her eyes to see Akamaru's ears had pumped up enough weight for her to continue before he innocently tilted his head. She pet him and his tail began to wag. She continued scratching his ears and the big dog leaned into her hands for more love. Weiss started scratching the dog's head affectionately as she had quickly become engrossed in petting him. The others watched with amusement as the most reluctant and coldest member of the group had fallen prey to her base instinct and pampering dogs. Ruby smiled and leaned towards her sister. I think she likes him. Yang grinned, and thus the ice heart melts. While the sisters giggled, Tenzin leaned towards her partner with worry. How do you think Naruto's going to handle this? Knowing him? Not very well. Hunting. Naruto frowned. Just so you know, I blame you for this. Blake rebuked. This isn't my fault. You're the one that grabbed the whole shelf and tipped it over, and I grabbed it because I thought you were going to pull me off my feet or something. It was a reflex. What you did was on purpose. You want to talk about doing stuff on purpose? You were pretty quick to shift the blame to me when the librarian came over. Well, a fat lot of good that did to me. He finished off the pile before reaching down and started stacking back another collection of books they had toppled over. Can't believe we have to stack these books back up. Shouldn't that already be someone's job here? Maybe, but they forced it on us. We've been doing this for an hour. Everyone left already. Naruto complained, slamming a book into his forehead as he bemoaned. And I still don't get this crazy filing system they use to sort books out. These numbers go with these letters, and you don't know it's just arranging them alphabetically. You do know it's arranging them alphabetically, right? Blake deadpanned with a dry stare up at her companion. Naruto looked over the books again and frowned. Oh, damn it, shut up. Blake scrunched up her face and decided to just do that. Stay quiet and finish the job. The sooner they were done, the sooner she could get back to her room and forget this whole mess. The two remained silent for a few minutes as they just focused on the task at hand. Blake fumed a little and found herself split between which action she wanted to take next. She wanted to remain silent and let Naruto wallow in the fact that this was his fault and they were paying for it. That may have been childish and even petulant, but damn it, everyone deserved their time to act like a brat, her included. But what she needed to do more than anything was approach the topic again to clarify what he said. How did he know I was a fondness? Naruto was quiet when he heard her question before he realized she was picking up the conversation from before. His feelings of annoyance at their forced act quickly transmitted into a subtle worry that he might tick off the girl with his answer. He spoke calmly. Kiba just knew. But how? Yep, there was bite in her voice, but it was unstable. But it was understandable considering she just found out someone knew her secret, and he just knew for some reason. His semblance, Naruto explained. Apparently, when it's activated, he can sense different smells between humans and faunus. During initiation, he had it activated almost the entire time, so it was pretty easy for him to notice we smelled different compared to everyone else. That's how he knew. Her smell. She had trained in subterfuge and infiltration for years. She had cut off her ties with her past so that she would never get found out. She spent almost all of her time remaining out of people's focus and made sure never to draw attention to herself. But she got found out because she smelled different. She wasn't going to have to cover herself in perfume like Weiss or cookie crumbs like Ruby to hide now, would she? Blake furrowed her eyes in thought before she continued lining the books. I think I have to talk to him myself. No, it's okay. Naruto looked over at the girl that refused to look away from the road directly in front of her. He attempted to ease her worry. I made him promise to keep your secret. He won't tell a soul. That's nice, but I find it hard to take that to heart considering he told your secret so easily. He told my secret because he didn't know it was a secret. He just thought I was he thought I wore the bandanas for fashion or something. He probably thought the same about your bow. She still didn't seem convinced and on edge about the whole thing. Blake, look at me. She gave a heavy sigh before her amber eyes turned to regard him. Naruto looked squarely at her and spoke in a firm voice. If you won't trust him, then at least trust me. I promise we won't say anything to anyone about your secret, not a soul, I promise. So trust me, okay? And could she trust him? That was a question she had some difficulty answering. By normal standards, she wouldn't, almost being very careful about those she trusted. She had only just started trusting her teammates, and she spent nearly every waking moment with at least one of them every day. And even then, she made painstakingly sure that she was comfortable with them before she eased into it. While Naruto was just a leader from another team who, until recently, she had at most shared several sentences with in passing. So by that logic, no, she shouldn't trust him. But that was until recently. Recently, she had snuck off to check on him after his indecent fighting carton and walking in to see him drying off his pair of hidden ears. But she already knew he was a Faunus, and in return, he clarified that he knew she was one too. After that, they had taken their time heading back to class and started dipping into discussions she hadn't ever planned to engage with anyone else. And oddly enough, she started some of them, talking about their teams, their semblance, and even alluding to why they had their features hidden in the first place. He even offered to listen to why she wore her bow in the first place, if she wanted to take it off, which was still an idea she wasn't going to entertain, but it was an exception and surprising nice gesture. Somehow, in the few times they had talked, Blake had become comfortable speaking with him and divulging more than she had with her own team. So despite her unease, I'll trust you, she finally answered, seeing a small smile grow on the blonde's face. She turned back to the ship and continued her job while quietly saying, "Don't let me down." Naruto smiled, knowing he had received some modicum of respect and trust from the black-haired girl. His eyes stayed on her for a moment longer, trailing up to her head and landing on the bow that concealed her ears from the world. He thought about his own ears before asking, "Does it hurt?" "Does what hurt?" "Tying them in the bow. Does it hurt?" Naruto reached up and patted his bandana. "When I first started with the banana, my ears got really itchy lying on my hair. It got easier after a while, but they still itch sometimes. What about you?" Blake hesitated and felt her ears twitch, then move her bow on reflex. "It did at first. My ears felt constrained sometimes, and they got stiff straight so still. But I've grown accustomed to it now." She sometimes wished she didn't have to, but this was the decision she made. She had to live with the side effects. She looked down at the books in her hands. "We're lucky, having to do so little to hide our features. Some people aren't that fortunate." "What do you mean?" "Well, it's difficult to hide tails and large ears," Blake clarified. "I doubt Velvet would have an easy time concealing her ears unless she had a very large hat. But even then, hiding Faunus features today is easier than it was in the past, when the humans and Faunus were more harshly segregated. The humans went to great lengths to keep Faunus out of their borders, so in order to find sanctuary in their walls, Faunus went to extreme features to fit in." "How extreme?" "They would cut off their ears or cut off their tails so no one would see them, and pull off their claws and nails so they wouldn't come out on reflex, pluck out their feathers so no one would see, fell down their horns to the base underneath their hair." Blake's hands tensed around the book she held as Naruto felt in horror at the idea of doing that to yourself willingly. And even then, it wasn't enough. Despite torturing themselves and defacing themselves permanently to try and fit in, some Faunus were still thrown out and ostracized. Even if they looked the same, humans still regarded us as lesser. And thinking about it just Naruto could tell how much she was trying to hold back her rage as her hands started to shake with the book in her hands. Without thinking, he reached out and held her shoulder, causing her trembling to stop as she looked to the hand and trailed up to its owner. He quickly pulled it back before it became too awkward, but noticed that her anger had faded in with a small nod of thanks from her as well. And even though Faunus don't resort to those methods anymore, the same discrimination still happens frequently, but not as often, Naruto countered. Faunus have been treated more fairly over the last few years, publicly and privately, but it still happens. What happened with Carton and Velvet is a perfect example. And that stopped. Carton doesn't harass her anymore. Hell, I haven't seen him pick on anyone recently at all. Good for him, but what about the thousands of people just like him all over Remnant that still bully Faunus for being Faunus? they can go to hell. But I bet there are more people out there that would consider faunists as normal people now than as second-class citizens. Blake huffed. What about the faunists employed by the Schneiders Company? Do you believe those work conditions are fair between everyone that worked there? Naruto was silenced by that opinion as he shook his head. See, you can't say there still isn't discrimination with injustice like that is still prevalent. I'm not saying they're innocent, I'm saying it's gotten better over the years. The wizard boy tried to rationalize. The mining job conditions suck, but there are plenty of other people who get great jobs around Remnant. I've seen dozens of honest have jobs in ownership and management in Bell alone. And what about all the ones that are hunters? The general populace don't have the skills to pursue a life as husband or huntresses. Blake countered. They wouldn't be able to find a stable lifestyle or provide for themselves like hunters would. But those hunters are the ones that can change people's views and inspire them. Never spoke hopefully with a mirthless chuckle. There are always going to be some of those assholes that stick to their views and hate us, but we can still trust open people to have our backs and inspire new generations to believe in equality. That's what's been happening these last few years. Things have been getting better. The only reason things have been getting better is because people are afraid of the white. Blake caught herself before she finished that sentence, but the message had clearly been delivered. Nata looked stunned by what Blake had said as the girl lowered her head in shame to avoid meeting his eyes. She didn't want to bring that up. It was extremely inappropriate, not to mention just plain childish and wrong. She had gotten worked up and immediately said the point that came to her mind before she could properly think it over. Although no matter how inappropriate that defense may have been, it was right. The discrimination and racism against the faunists had certainly quieted over recent years, but not because people were looking at them as equals. People were afraid of earning the focus and scorn of the White Fang in retaliation for their prejudice. That's why publicly faunists were treated better, but privately they would still be treated badly. If you earned too much attention for your wrongdoings, you earned the hatred of the most infamous faunist rights group in Remnant. The SDC was a perfect example. They continued to give faunists less than hospital wages and conditions, and had to pay the price. Before, it was just the shipments disappearing and their meetings being delayed by threats. Now there were open attacks, and if you were caught by the White Fang and they believed you were guilty, it was hard to think about. The girl raised her head a little and looked in the corner of her eyes to see the expression on her fellow faunist's face. The White Fang was a bit of a divisive subject among faunists. She wanted to know if she may have hit a sore subject with him and stopped their conversation altogether, but she didn't want to know. She wanted to keep talking and mend this problem. She had stated, worried about the repercussion this might cause. Before she asked almost in a whisper, "What do you think about them, the White Fang?" Naruto slid a novel into place before he just remained still and looked straight ahead. Blake believed she might have said something to push him over the edge before he moved again, when his hand slipped down and stayed at his side. The blonde shook his head. "I wish I could have met them a few years back, before everything happened." Blake blinked in honest surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean back during the peaceful protest days, when they led rallies and they brought people together to promote equality, when all they needed were signs and good speeches to convince people." Naruto scoffed and smiled. "If I was a smarter kid, or if I paid more attention when I was younger, I probably would have gone out and joined them in one of those things. I think what they did back then was the right thing to do. But now what? I hate it." Naruto forcefully pushed the last of the books into their place before he stomped over to the table. He leaned on its side and crossed his arms in anger. "All the fear, all the despair, the horror they cause in the stuff reported on TV, it's worse than the grim. They're doing it on purpose." He grit his teeth in anger and looked up at the girl that had turned back to him. "Velvet says she shouldn't fight back against Cardin because she was worried people might think she was a White Fang supporter by doing so. For a group that's supposed to be leading the rights revolution of faunists, all they seem to be doing is scaring humans and faunists together. But they're trying to do the right thing." Blake defended faster than she ever should have with the topic. "They were aiming for a noble goal. Peaceful protest and kind speeches could only go so far, but sometimes actions have to be taken." Blake's face mixed with trepidation and anxiety. "Even if their methods are a little extreme, they just seem misguided. Even if the majority of them are misguided, the ones that guide them and tell them to do these things are totally aware of what they're doing. They're just angry and hateful and evil and horrible people that just want to do these things for retaliation." Naruto seethed before he let out a heavy sigh and gripped the edges of the table as tightly as possible. His angry scowl softened into a sad look as he hung his head. And even if they believe they're doing something right, doing the right thing or a selfless act, if they're hurting other people to do it, Naruto's shoulders fell and shook his head, then they're wrong and they have to live with that. Do you really think that? Yes, I do. Blake looked around as the heavy silence fell between them. There were other circumstances, complicated matters, things he probably didn't know and couldn't possibly know without being there. There were more pieces to this problem than what was just reported or talked about on TV. But somewhere deep down, Blake felt something warm around inside her. What she believed and what he said both had credence, but in the end, she knew. I don't know when I was going to tell them. I don't know if I was ever going to tell them. Naruto confessed to the cat with a heavy, somber tone to his voice. Blake coming out of her thoughts to give him her attention, he continued, I kept convincing myself that I would tell them someday, the next day even, but then I'd keep finding a reason to put it off. Too much work today, too tired. They wouldn't be able to understand today, but I just kept pushing it off because I was scared. He shook his head. I thought I was lucky that they trusted me after we revealed we used to work for Wilsk. I thought that was a one-time thing. If I revealed that I was honest and I was lying to them about everything, that would be the last straw. It wasn't just about the fact that they might not like honest, but maybe they wouldn't be able to trust me anymore after I already tested their limits once. But when they told me they knew and that they figured out, a relieved smile came over his face, and a small laugh followed. Blake, it felt like something that had come off my shoulders. I was scared and angry and exhausted when they said it, but when it was done, I was happy. I was relieved they knew. They didn't care. They didn't see me as a thief or a faunus. He smiled fondly and looked up at the girl. They saw me as Naruto. For probably the first time in my whole life, I had met people that just saw me. That's what I believe can happen for the rest of the world, for the possibility of other people. It wouldn't be easy if, hey, we can hope. Understanding, empathy, looking past the difference on the outside to see the individual within. That's everything she could ask for from a group of people, everything she ever wanted, everything she could ever hope for her team to one day achieve, but they would never be able to achieve it as long as she never revealed the truth to her team. I freeze whenever I think about it. Blake admitted in shame as she leaned against the shelf and gripped her arm for support. I wore this bow in the first place because I wanted people to see me for who I am, not what I am. They could like me, they could hate me. I wouldn't care as long as they made the decision based off of their impression of me. But being with Ruby after all this time, I think they know me for everything I have to offer at this point, and the only logical step to do next to prove that I trust them would be to tell them what I really am. She shook her head and looked off. But when I think about the reaction, you know, Ruby and Yang, not offered, they wouldn't care. Ruby already loves you as much as possible, and I'm pretty sure all that would happen with Yang is that she'd make some crappy pun and just move on. The only hiccup would probably be Weiss. Blake finished. After everything she's been exposed to, the conditions of fondness she's been privy to since she was a child, and the horrible things she's heard about the White Fang attacking subsidiaries of the SDC, I wouldn't be surprised if she would never talk to me again if I revealed myself to her. But you said you thought she was your friend. You could trust her if you just take some time and sit down with her. But that's not all. It's not just how she might react that I'm afraid of, Blake said sadly while her amber eyes locked into blue ones across from her. What if I do something wrong? What if she accepts that I'm a faunus, but I do something vindictive or foolish? That I would just prove everything she might think bad about faunus are true? That after everything I said about wanting to help bridge relationships between humans and faunus, I just somehow ruin it by doing something petty and stupid? She gripped her arm as tight as possible. I prove I'm no different. Take it from someone that overthinks a lot of things. He'd screwed up. Naruto gave her an easy smile and shrugged. You're worrying too much. I want to tell them everything, but can't summon the nerve to take the chance because I'm overthinking it. Blake sighed and shook her head. Same problem I always have. I suppose if I want to take the next step, I'll just have to make a decision and take that leap when I think it's right. It's best, right? Yeah. Blake noticed the color of the library had changed to burnt orange and looked out the window above to see the sky had turned red. It's almost evening. Oh shit, we've been here all day. Naruto laughed and stood off the table. He scratched his head. Didn't we come here to find me a book? Blake shrugged. We lost track of time. I think we strayed away from finding you a book after the first hour. She smiled and leaned off the bookshelf as well. And I didn't exactly follow through on my promise to find you something to read for my personal choice. So I'll take responsibility for that. That's cool. Wasn't as bad a way to spend a free day as I thought. It was almost kind of fun. Blake nodded. I suppose almost kind of fun would be the best way to explain it. Naruto smiled and made his way towards the aisles to leave before he turned back to Blake. I think you will find the right time to tell the others who you are. He laughed, and I'll bet it will be better than before. Just wait. Blake watched him walk off as she lingered around the library for a moment. The cat fawness rubbed her eyes and gave a heavy sigh before grabbing her book. She looked around at the rows and rows of books before making her way back to her room. Hunting. Naruto yawned as he opened the door and walked in to hear his teammates laughing between each other. He closed the door and got their attention as they cheered. Naruto, there you are. Hey, sleepyhead. How was your day? The blonde had nothing to offer his closest friends but an angry frown. He growled out through his teeth, "Hey guys!" The sarcasm and venom sticking behind his words. "How was your day? You guys have fun?" Kiba sat on his bed and grinned. "Absolutely. I had fun." Tendon agreed. Lucia nodded. "It wasn't bad." "Well, doesn't that sound nice?" The whiskered boy snarled. "Well, while you guys went off and had fun, guess what I did? I hung out in a library for the whole day because you guys didn't wake me up to join you." He accused them with a pointed finger. "Shame on all of you." "Hey, we tried to wake you up." The only female of Noctis defended their stance, "but you would not budge. So the next time you want to join us, get some more rest so you can wake up on time." Natos frowned deepened before he slumped over. "Fine. Well, unsurprisingly, being in the library made me tired. So until you guys want to do something, I'm gonna relax. What the hell is that thing?" "Ruff. That's Akamaru," Kiba answered. "Akamaru, this is Naruto. Say hi." "Bark. What the hell is he doing here?" The others taking close notice of the fact that he had lowered himself into a grappling stance as if preparing to fight and tackle the dog at any moment. Instinct seemed to have taken charge of Naruto's movement, while the dog was just happily sat on the bed with the soft wag of his tail. "My sister sent him over to stay with us for a few days. He's just gonna stay here for a while before we send him back to the shelter." Kiba just smirked and looked between his partner knowingly. "Get along, you two. Why the hell is it on my bed?" "I think he liked your smell and got comfortable lying on top of it while we waited for you." "And why is she here?" "Comfy." "Yeah, Ruby wouldn't let him go." Naruto clenched his teeth so hard he thought he was going to crack something. He slowly edged forward, making sure the dog wasn't alarmed or startled by any sudden movement before he started poking the girl that was lying on top of it. "Ruby, what are you doing?" "Naruto," she dreamily moaned. "He's like a big fluffy pillow. I want to take a nap on him." "Ugh." He groaned and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Ruby, go back to your room." "I can't right now. I'm at Sleepy Time Junction." Naruto rolled his eyes and just grabbed the girl by the back of her hood. He effortlessly lifted her off the dog and carried her to the door like a kitten held by the nape of its neck. He gently tossed her out the door and closed it behind him as he heard her moan sadly, and the others said, "Aw." "Now, as for you," he marched up to his bed and bent down to meet the massive canine face to face. He threatened with a growl, "Get off my bed." Akamaru simply tilted his head and kept wagging his tail. "Off my bed!" The dog leaned in a little closer and sniffed his face. "Get off my goddamn bed!" I looked to the cheek. "So it's gonna be like that, huh? You stupid mutt." "Hunting." Ruby closed the door behind her with a sad slump of her shoulders as she dragged her feet over to her bed. Weiss noticed her leader's return and lack of energy. "What happened to you?" "All the best stuff has to end," she said sadly as she jumped up into the top bunk and let it sway before settling. Yang asked from overhead with a curious tone into her bubbly voice. "So Blake, how was your day? How soon was it until you started missing us and wished you tagged along? 1 minute? 2? "Neither," she sharply replied in an effort to stop the blonde's prying. "I was in the library all afternoon." She heard a long, strained groan above her before it became muffled by a pillow to stop Yang from screaming. She just chose to ignore it and finally go back to enjoying her book. Weiss stood up and walked over to the desk before she asked him, "So what did you do in the library? Make any breakthroughs in finding out how we can assist our two deadweights in learning something?" "Hey! No, actually," Blake drawled and lowered her story. "I went to the library, but I was preoccupied with something else." "Really?" The Harris turned in her seat. "Then what did you do?" "I'm pretty sure I just wasted an afternoon failing to do what I said I'd." "Oh." Blake slipped off her bed and made her way over to her extensive collection of books. She scanned the rows in search of one title in particular. Blake, Found it. She pulled it out with a satisfied smile and started walking out. I'll be back in a minute. Blake didn't wait for a reply as she strolled out of her room and headed right next door. She rapped her knuckles against the wood and waited for someone to open the door. Fortunately, the person that opened it was exactly the one she wanted to talk to. What? The vicious growl and grimy, almost shiny sheen of something on his cheek seemed to greet her. She blinked in surprise. What happened to you? You weren't this irritable a few moments ago. Ugh. He wiped his face and mumbled into his hands. A few moments ago, I didn't know I was going to have to share my room and maybe my bed with the flea-ridden little mongrel. Kiba, he doesn't have fleas, Sasuke, and he is in no way little. What are you, rough? Blake went rigid as her whole body froze on instinct. Fear and dread gripped every fiber of her being as she felt the overwhelming need to bolt and hide. The slobbery cheek, the undeniable stench in the air, the barking. No, it wasn't. And with a loud thump, she saw a massive white animal come around Naruto's waist to see who was standing at the door. The horrible beast tilted its head and made his floppy ears wave with it before it barked at their newest visitor. Ruff! Holy! Nope! Naruto pushed her away and closed the door behind him before the large canine could push past to sniff his fellow fondness. He breathed a sigh of relief before looking the black-clad girl over to see she was still pretty shooken up. You gonna be okay? I should be. Blake instinctively reached up and fixed her hair like it was like it was messy to distract from the fact she froze in fear. She felt her throat dry up and asked, "What was that thing and why was it so big?" That's Kiba's stupid dog, and I don't know why he's big. Not to say that his tone short and the frown on his face deepening as he threw a thumb over his shoulder. He's apparently gonna be staying in our room for a few days, and he's gotten comfortable with sitting on my bed. Blake calmed her nerves and noticed the disdain in Naruto's voice. I'm guessing you don't have a good relationship with dogs either. They're always sniffing me and barking. They grab my food and lick me, and some even chase me around a little for shits and giggles. I really don't like them. Naruto groaned before he sighed and looked back at her. So what's up? She handed him a thick green hardback book that he quickly accepted. He looked it over. Tales of the Hood. What's this? My recommendation. Blake answered as he opened it and started skimming through the pages. A story about a man that was isolated from society for a number of years before being reintroduced to it. He takes it upon himself to try and save people in his city by fighting them at night. It's a series added on every year or so. It's fiction, set in a world without semblances or grim, but it still has trouble from people. I certainly enjoyed it. Redemption, morality. 600 pages. Not a gasp and looked at the girl skeptically. Are you crazy? I read 10 pages today and drop dead immediately after. How am I supposed to do this? Try harder, she unenthusiastically offered as the fox grumbled and flipped through the book. She spoke. You know, you said that if I couldn't find you a book that you might like, you'd boast that you were right about reading and being boring. But if I find you a book, you can't even take the time to try and read it. What's that say about you? A cheeky small smile grew on her face as Blake joked. Is reading that much of a challenge for you? Oh, you want to play it like that? He grinned. Okay, 600 pages. Easy. Wonderful. She gave him a stern glare and pointed at the book. Don't rip the pages. Don't fold the corners. That's my book. If you do anything to it, I'll come down on you like hellfire. And don't let that thing get his slobbery drool all over it either. Got it? Got it. Good. Blake started stepping off back to her room before stopping and turning back. Naruto. He stood up from the. He looked up from the book as she nodded to him with a smile. Thanks for making today almost kind of fun. He smiled and nodded in return before he headed back into his room. Blake turned back towards hers. In time to see her teammates' heads sticking out of the door before popping back in before she noticed, or at least Ruby and Weiss did in an attempt to respect her privacy. Yang kept watching and even poking out a little more to display the big grin spreading over her face. Oh, fantastic. Now she had to deal with this. So, what were you and Naruto talking about? Yang asked as Blake slipped in and made her way to the bed. Something interesting, I hope. Not really. Just suggesting a book for him to read. Well, that's nice. Weiss added as she tried to act preoccupied by something on the desk, but her interest was clearly split as she cried. I wasn't aware you two were on good enough terms to speak regularly. Not as regularly as you think, she deadpanned as she sat and focused on her book again. Just a few times. Blake, that's really nice. Ruby had cheered up and was hanging over the edge of her bunk to talk with them. So what kind of book did you give him? Was it a romance? Did you convince him to open a dictionary? Or was it romance? Yang stretched out with a grin. You know, the fun kind. Adventure book. He's gonna read it and see what he thinks. That's all. Can we drop it now? The finger pushed down on the top of Blake's book, and she found all 3 members of her team standing on the other side with intrigue and curious expressions. Her partner shook her head with the biggest shit-eating grin she'd ever seen. "Oh, Blake, you don't get out of this that easily." And all she wanted to do today was get comfortable and read. She already knew it, but this definitely affirmed her thoughts. This was all Naruto's fault. End of chapter 33.